County library system, where I got my SHRM-CP, which stands for Society of Human Resource Management Certified Professional. Um, I always tell people that I love HR, despite the fact that my husband says don't tell people that, they'll think I'm weird. But I really do. I love getting different perspectives. I love understanding human behavior, and I kind of love all sides of being able to support staff so that they can apply positions. So I'm very excited to be here with you today and answer all sorts of good questions. So thank you, Tara.
Amy, thank you so much. Our next panelist today is Douglas. And before you introduce yourself, Douglas, I just want to mention we are recording this session. So just so everybody's aware. And
Good plan.
Douglas, could you please go ahead and introduce
340
yourself?
and then the star key.
If I'm sorry, if you're attending and you're not currently speaking, would you mind muting yourself? Thank you so much. Go ahead, Douglas. Sorry about that.
Sure. I'm Douglas Zucker. Good morning. I am an attorney. I'm a partner with the law firm of Hatfield Schwartz Law Group. We are a labor and employment law boutique firm representing public and private employers as in all aspects of labor and employment law. And obviously, we represent public libraries. I've been a labor and employment attorney my whole career. I actually majored in it. Amy just said she loves HR. I do too. It was my major undergraduate. I have a master's in industrial relations and human resources, and it's what I practiced for my whole career. I also represent public libraries, and I know a bunch of you because I represented 50 or more municipal libraries in the county library system. And those I counsel and represent them on all kinds of labor and employment law issues, as well as all aspects of library law and related issues. I know both of my panelists, Amy and Laura, and I'm really delighted to be here with them and all of you. And my one disclaimer I have to say as a lawyer is, although I'm an attorney, and even though a number of you are clients of mine, nothing I say is intended to be legal advice. It's just a discussion and guidance, no different from anything that Laura or Amy may say, and encourage you to consult your attorney if you have any to get legal clarification on anything. So I'm really delighted to be here, and thanks so much.
Thank you, Douglas, and thank you also for that very important reminder and disclaimer. We appreciate you. And last but certainly not least, the fabulous Laura. Would you mind introducing yourself, Laura? Thank you.
Everybody. I'm Laura Rifkin. I'm currently the director at the Township of Washington Library up in Bergen County. I've been working in libraries for 22 years, 15 or 16 of which are as a library director. I've worked at a number of libraries in Buckles, 4 or 5, and then I went over to NYPL, and I was a branch manager for the Ottendorfer Library in the East Village, and then Seward Park, which was their Southern Manhattan hub. And I loved it because, growing up in Buckles, you get your library degree and you're kind of like, you're ready to roll. You're excited about it. And then you become in a management position and you're like, they taught me nothing about HR, and then you keep going up. And as a director, you're like, you're learning as you go. And we have such a great network that we kind of connect with each other. And LAMP wasn't always LAMP. LAMP evolved because of our conversations. And I went to New York Public and they gift you this HR business partner who anytime you have an HR question, you can go to. And they offer you these HR classes. And I'm kind of like stunned and a sponge absorbing everything. And when I came back, I felt much more confident in what I was doing and how I was coaching people and how we were broaching different employee issues. And then this past year, I actually decided to go and get my HR generalist certification. So I just am completing that now through the County College of Morristown, which is why they asked me to be on the panel. And then once things calm down a little bit, I'm debating going for my SHRM certification, but that's a whole another hurdle to go. So Amy, God bless you. But it's it's a whole thing. But I'm really excited to hear, all the different things that you guys have going on. And it is a really weird thing to say that we love HR. But I think if you're a people person, and most people in libraries are, you kind of naturally do like certain things that you actually know how to solve. and you actually feel really good about helping somebody else through a difficult time to better your organization, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Laura. I really appreciate that wonderful introduction. We're so thankful to have you as part of this panel today. Laura and I worked at the same library. I was part-time. When was that? Like, 2006 or
Six?
7?
Six. Yeah,
Yeah.
2006, I think. Yeah.
I'm like, oh boy, we have to
Yeah.
get in the Wayback Machine for that one. But yeah. But it's so good. We're so thankful still. I'm glad to still be your colleague, and what a boon you are to librarianship. So we're just so glad to have you in Buckles. But all right, panelists, are you ready to begin? We're
Yes.
going to start with some of the questions that were sent in advance. And some of these are more general, some are more specific, and any panelist is welcome to chime in. I just want to remind anyone who's attending this meeting, I just went through and muted a bunch of folks. If you're not speaking, please just keep yourself muted, because libraries are busy places. We have background noise behind all of us as we're in this meeting. So, all right. So our first question, they're divided up roughly by category. So this first category is performance management. What a nice way to say that, right? So our first question today, if a new hire is not working out, what is the best practice to go about releasing them? I like that word. This particular person is asking this question from a non-civil service library. They're stating they do evaluations and benchmarks performance at 90 days, 6 months, and a year. Library board is afraid of a potential lawsuit. So I will let any of y'all chime in on that question.
Sure. So, I would say that, I mean, your board's fear of a lawsuit is very common, but the bigger risk here is continuing forth with a member of staff who ultimately will not work out, right? To keep carrying them along. I think it's phenomenal that you have I think you said 90 days, 6
It was
months.
90 days, 6 months, and a year.
That's great. The best thing to do is release them within those 90 days if possible. If it's too close to that, then I would give them an extension period of their introductory period. And then if it's giving them that one last opportunity to improve, but make sure you've communicated with them the expectations for their position, make sure you've addressed issues immediately. And make sure you've given them at least that one opportunity to improve before you then let them go. I personally don't let anyone go without checking in with our labor attorney. I think it's just, if you have the funds, it's a good best practice, because if anyone can tell you if a lawsuit is, potentially coming based on the documentation you have, it's the labor attorney. But if you don't, I mean, just make sure that you have your own documentation, and that you're giving them that one more opportunity to improve before letting them go within their introductory period.
Thank you so much, Amy. Oh, yes, Douglas, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to build on that. If you have a 90-day introductory period, I'd recommend that you consider not just waiting for 90 days to do the first evaluation. 90 days, 6 months, and a year is nice, but if you want to evaluate new hires, consider doing a 30-day, 60-day, and 90-day, because this way you'll have the documentation Amy just mentioned. I agree totally. And this way you have documentation built up already leading up to that 90-day period. I also think so something that's struck me for years is somebody has a 90-day evaluation period and they get evaluated in 90 days. But once they hit the 90 days, then maybe they're over that period. So I would do the last one at 85 days or something, so that if you have to terminate, you're doing it prior to the end of the 90-day period. And again, as Amy said, you want to make sure you're documenting everything. One other thing is to remember, if you're non-civil service and non-union, then they are an employee at will, which means you have the right to sue. It doesn't mean that you can, I mean, you have the right to, not the right to sue, right to terminate them. They have the right to sue, I guess, but the better your documentation, the better preparation, the more warning they have about the possibility of being terminated. That decreases the likelihood, I think, of termination. But it also means they have less avenues, because as an at-will employee, they don't have the union avenue to pursue, or civil service.
Thank you, Douglas. That was really helpful. I don't know if Laura would like to speak on this one as well.
I think Amy and Douglas have covered most of it. The one thing that I will offer is some of you may have remembered Siobhan Koch. She was in our system as a library director for a while. She was just actually in the CCM generalist program with me, and we did our capstone project together. And it was actually on coaching under performance. And there is a whole section that we put together on things that you can do in the 30, 60, and 90-day mark about how to check in with them, what to look for. It's a bit much to go through here, but I can send it to Tara and Darlene to share with whoever
Thank you.
registered with this so that way you guys can look through the slides. But it's just a really nice, simple breakdown. And then also how to document those conversations. Because the one thing that I really like to do because Douglas is my labor attorney, when I go to him, I like to have everything kind of nice and neat and organized. So I did my due diligence, and now not for nothing, but now it's on Doug's plate. You know what I mean? And he's sanctioning my next actions. But I can definitely send that in like a PDF format so that way everybody can see that.
Thanks, Laura. That would be really helpful. And I think what you just said makes a lot of sense. If you're going to be passing something along to an attorney, you want to give them all the tools they need, right, to do their job. So documentation never hurts anyone, right? We're always document everything when in doubt. Thank you all so much. All right, we're going to move on to our next question. During which stages of progressive discipline is it appropriate to involve the union? I don't know if we have anyone who wants to
All right.
speak to that.
I'll
Okay, thank
touch
you,
that
Douglas.
because as far as both the other libraries, both Amy and Laura's library are non-union to the best of my knowledge. Some union contracts require CCing the union on disciplinary matters, whether it's a written warnings or certainly about something like a suspension or a termination. And so one of the things is you want to get the union involved. You're asking at what stage. I don't think they need to be involved. You can notify them about a written warning. I don't think they need to be involved with it per se. And you don't want to get a grievance over a written warning. Sometimes you do it. Some contracts say that you can't grieve written warnings. I don't see a basis for grieving a written warning because all it is a record of what's happened, as opposed to a definitive action like a suspension would be. Um, if you have a good relationship with the union, it's good to sometimes advise in advance. The union could be appreciative of it, and you're giving them it gives you the first chance to explain why you're doing what you're doing, rather than the employer calling it to the union and being all hysterical and complaining and giving their perspective, which from your perspective is probably not accurate because otherwise you wouldn't be suspending them. Because I've rarely seen an employee who said, yes, I deserve to be suspended. Thank you. And generally speaking, they have their own version of the facts, which are not consistent with your version of the facts. And so sometimes, again, depends on the relationship you have, but sometimes it's a way to help to enhance the relationship is by talking to the union rep up front. The biggest union of libraries in New Jersey that I know of, in our area at least, is CWA. And Renee is and Phyllis are the reps for that. And I've worked with them in a lot of places, and I've seen that they have been cooperative. Doesn't mean they're always agreed. Doesn't mean they're not going to grieve things or bring things to arbitration, but they're also pretty reasonable. And if you can develop a good rapport with whoever the union rep is, by bringing him in, it will make the issues a lot smoother because sometimes they'll even be able to talk things out ahead of time and work something out if there's going to be some kind of compromise, making it a 3-day instead of a 5-day suspension, whatever. And so I think it's important, particularly on that level, at the level of suspension and certainly at termination, to get the union involved so that they're aware and try to have them work with you rather than just opposed to you. Alternatively, if you have a union that's just very combative, you have to tread more lightly, but you still have to get them involved and keep them appraised.
Great. Thanks so much, Douglas. Amy and Laura, you're passing on the union question, yes? Okay. All right. I'll continue then.
The only one thing I would add, so I will, full honesty, I don't work in a union or civil service environment anymore, thank goodness. But when I did work for a county library system, I was the union shop steward for a period of time, and we, kind of just looking at this from another perspective, people would come to us and say, "At what
Hmm.
point can you come to the meeting with me?" And what we would tell them is when they thought that the meeting could reasonably lead to discipline. And so just know that, taking a look at it from another perspective, that's what, as shop stewards, we would advise the employees who were concerned that they were on the path to discipline.
Um,
And I work in civil service and union library.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I was
That's
going to
so
say,
hard to go around.
oh
Like,
no, it's great. Everything about it is great. And I always tell anyone, any staff member who's concerned, you're always welcome to bring your shop steward with you. Like that's no problem. If it makes them comfortable, like they're more than welcome to come. So, and I usually try to give our shop steward a heads up if I think someone may be approaching them with an issue so they're not blindsided because they're a staff member and they have their own work to do and their own things that they're dealing with. So, never
but
want
as
to,
shop steward, we were only there to witness, right? We
yes,
weren't there to participate in the
no,
conversation.
but
So
just
make
like,
sure that you're not engaging the shop steward in part of, any sort
no.
of conversation.
No, I always just say that someone may be approaching you with an issue. I just want you to be aware of that. And then, you're welcome to come to whatever meeting if they ask you to. But just so we're not surprising anybody.
if I may, to that end, it's interesting because after Amy spoke, I'm going to say something, and then what Howard just said doesn't undermine it exactly, but is a little inconsistent. What Amy said was great because she was talking about what's called wine garden rights, which is the
Hmm.
legal right that an employee has to have a union rep present, but it's only for an investigatory. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
You got it
Thank you.
that
An
time, yeah.
investigatory interview. There we go. The employee reasonably believes will lead to discipline. So if you're just meeting with someone to administer the discipline, they don't have the right to have a union rep present. It's only if you are doing this investigatory interview with them that they'll have the union rep present. But I'm in libraries and other employers all the time where the employees and a lot of times management and union reps think that they can just be in there all the time. Now, it doesn't mean they can't, as per what Tara's doing, but legally they don't necessarily have the right to.
Hmm.
And when your shop stewards are cooperative with you, that's fine. When they're antagonistic and creating disruptions, then sometimes it's better not to include them because they're just going to undermine what you're trying to do. So if you're just going to administer discipline, employees do not have the right. You can allow it, but they don't have the legal right to have a union rep present.
Thanks for the clarification, Douglas. I appreciate it. All right. Continuing on, next question. How do you recommend management handle staff who have a negative or sour attitude, but whose work product is satisfactory? Soft skills are hard to teach and write up.
This is so accurate because so many
Yeah.
times, the soft skills don't come through in an interview. You're kind of going based on what you're seeing at the interview when you're hiring. And I don't know if this person has been there for a long period of time or not. Um, from me, there's so many different resources that you have access to. Um, and it depends on the size of your library too. But emotional intelligence training and how you're understanding other people and how you're responding to other people, I've always found super, super helpful. Library 2.0 offers one online at a pretty reasonable cost, and you can do it as a group rate and stream it in your staff meeting, or you can have them do it individually at home because, some of the stuff that they, depending on who your staff member is that you're having do it, it's also a documented training that then I can tell Douglas I sent them to, you know? So that's helpful. And also Marjana Ermler, we had her do a couple of different Buckles trainings over the years. She used to do trainings at NYPL. She is like an emotional intelligence expert as well. And she can come out And it's like a really nice way to not single out an individual staff member, especially when, like they said, their productivity is good. So what are the soft skills that they're having trouble with? Is it negative aspects towards, customer service and the patrons, or more among staff, relationships and things like that? Emotional intelligence training really broaches that with all layers. It's about how they're reading the public and responding to it, as well as how they're reading and responding to each other in the staff room. So that was my comment on that one.
Thank you, Laura. And we did have a question. Someone would just like you to, oh, Catherine typed it in here already. So the name of the training that Laura mentioned was Emotional Intelligence Training through Library 2.0. Is that correct, Laura?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
And people
Anyone
always
else?
note that it's difficult to address kind of these soft skill issues, but you can always translate these into observable behaviors, right? Is it the tone with patrons or coworkers? Is it a resistance to direction? Is it undermining comments in meetings? Is it body language that's impacting service? So one thing that I find supervisors are often uncomfortable noting those observable standards because they think it's um, almost like opinion based, like, well, I think that, but they might not think that, right? So one thing that I think is helpful, we had actually brought in Cassie Colucci when she was a training manager, but she's now a library director at Roxbury. And she helped us create very specific, customer service standards, right? So now that we have these standards, it's easier to have something to tie into these behavioral, expectations, and something to point to and tie into to be able to more easily address those soft skills.
Thanks, Amy. That sounds super helpful. Laura, did you want to add anything?
I would just say it also depends on how, you're doing these 30, 60, and 90-day check-ins when somebody is onboarding, and that's part of your onboarding process. And it's so easy when somebody's been on staff for a long period of time, especially if you have an open door policy as a director, you feel like, well, they'll just come to me and talk to me about things. And a lot of times as the director, we're kind of all over the place, right? We got a lot of balls in the air, and we don't spend as much time checking in with the different parts of the staff, especially if you have a multi-floor building, and spending the time. So you're relying a lot on the department heads and what they're telling you that they're seeing. And I remember I had one person who had been a teacher in their previous career path, and came and had a really difficult time with patients with any of our senior population. And I have a huge percentage of my town that is a senior population. This was a problem. And they just lacked so much patience. And I'm trying to talk to this woman and figure out, and I'm watching her on the circ desk, and I'm like, she's super tech savvy, like crazy tech savvy. And we had so many that she was getting really impatient with them when they didn't know basics. And so, kind of leaning into that prior education background, I decided to do a 6-month special assignment for her where she did one-to-one computer lessons specifically with the seniors. And it's like, we're either going to lean into this and we're going to fix it, or we have to back roll this big time. So I wanted to give her the most connection with this. If all you're working with is that demographic, you're going to sink or swim. And she flourished. And it was like she really started to connect and realize what some of the hindrance were, even just the terminology that they were not used to from different, it sounds stupid, but like from typewriters versus keyboards and things like that. And once she was working with them at the end of that 6 months, it was a completely different person that came back to my circ desk. And we don't always have the time to observe people like that, but definitely encourage your department heads to really get to know and report back to you on interests of your staff, because it's those icebreakers that you're going to realize are not just icebreakers, but they're also key points of what you might be able to extrapolate in your employee to bring forward as we work with the public and as they work with each other, points of commonality. Oh, Tara, you're a DVC member. That is so awesome. Did you know, so and so goes to Disney like every other year? You guys should really connect. But also, Tara is in charge of computers and you're having trouble with computers. So you guys are going to have little chats from here on out in a calm, cool, non authoritative manner. that allows you to, people get nervous about asking different questions, even when they've been employed with us for a long time. You are still the superior in the building. And as nice as we try to be and as comfortable as we try to make that setting, there is that structure there and they get a little nervous. So having their department head step in, having colleagues that are also friendly, helps a lot to see what you can bring forward and what you might be able to re-navigate.
Great. Thank you, Laura. And thank you for that suggestion, example. Thank you for that example. I think it was really helpful.
Tara,
Yes.
before we move on, I just have a question from someone just on this whole topic about, what do you do when it's towards the director and they're rude and they have tone issues, they're accusatory? You want to write them up, but you're a little bit gun shy about, actually pulling the trigger on that. What's the time rule to like let go of like a poisonous staff member, essentially?
No, I told Nancy to just cross out because it's just for today, really.
Hold on, I'm just gonna mute that person. Sorry. Was that the end of the question,
Yes,
Catherine?
sorry.
Thank you. No, don't be sorry. So the question is when this attitude is directed at the director, right? How do you?
Yeah, and really, how do you, like you guys are saying, addressing all of those issues of, I guess, feeling that it's, in your opinion, that this is happening and doing the write-ups, and then at what point does that just become, it's time to let that person go? I think I'm asking the question correctly.
Yeah. Let me just try to build on what the things that were already said, because I agree with everything that Amy and Laura said. There's a difference between disciplinary action and corrective action. And what Laura was just describing is more of a corrective action approach. And I think the two have to be done together. You document what's happened, but the approach is not just to discipline the person, but to help them to get better. If that doesn't work, that's when you have to resort to discipline. In Laura's example, obviously it worked very well, which is fabulous, because it's always better if you can rehabilitate an employee and have them continue than to have to get rid of them and run the risk and have all the stress related to that, and then have to replace them and find someone new, train somebody new, and all those disruptions. The other part though is you have to trust yourself, and if you're the director or just any supervisor, if you see somebody who is poisonous, I think that's the term that Catherine used, and I think that's a good term, then you have to trust your own instincts. You're in that position for a reason. If you or a supervisor, even if they're the object of it, regardless of where the poison dart is going, it still stings the same way. And you have to just rely on yourself and not be afraid to say this is not appropriate conduct. The fact that it's in me doesn't change the fact that it's not appropriate conduct. And still deal with it and not let it continue too long, because a single poisonous person and attitude can often spread to other parts of the organization and create a lot more disruption than is necessary, a lot more stress than is necessary. And sometimes you have to cut out the poison so that everybody else can move on. Even though it's difficult and challenging to do it at that time, stressful to do it at the time, it's better to make the separation now and then move forward.
Thank you for that, Douglas. And I want to circle back. That sort of echoes what Amy said. You don't want to just retain a staff member that isn't a good fit for the organization for whatever reason. If it's a skill or attitude issue that can't be rehabilitated, it's better to nip it in the bud, right? Sooner than later, than let this person stay in your organization and cause other problems. So thank you all. That's great advice.
I just say one more thing.
Sure.
Just one thing to, I guess, be aware of is I've heard from, a number of library directors around the state, and sometimes these behaviors aren't intentional, they're generational. So, we have to remember that, some people who are entering the workforce right now were in COVID in lockdown for very formative years, and they don't necessarily understand fully the social norms that we all grew up with in what's acceptable and what's not. That's not to say to give these people an out. It's just when you're having that initial, maybe corrective conversation with them, maybe go into it with that mindset of understanding for the initial go through.
That's great advice. Oh, Laura, yes.
The other thing that I would add too is we're so used to like larger reports, like patient incident reports and stuff like that. When we're talking about reporting, my reporting on my staff is an Excel spreadsheet, and every staff member has a tab. And I list the date, the time, the duration of our conversation, and what was addressed. It does not need to be a 3-page report about what your sit down was, but it's really important that you do it for good or bad conversations, because if this particular staff member is coming at you constantly as the director and you are having a conversation every time with them, the next time it happens, you're going to go through and say, look, so and so, we have met about this 5 times this month already, or
Mm-hmm.
3 times this month already. And you're noting that pattern of behavior. You're also seeing what dates are it. Is there something that's happening in the building around that time frame? Is there something that's happening that you later found out? Some so and so in the family was diagnosed with something that they were dealing with. What is going on? But the pattern of dates is really important when I'm looking at things with my staff, to be able to see how often am I meeting with them about this particular issue. And I usually check in with Doug every so often, depending on the severity of the confrontation. So if it's like, okay, it's happened 3 times and that last one was a doozy, I'm just going to shoot Doug a quick email and let him know, I'm dealing with this particular reoccurring issue with a staff member. I'm documenting XYZ things, just to kind of get his radar on it, because if it continues to progress, we're going to head in a certain direction. And then he's going to give me, yep, we have all of our documentation. We know we're ready to go. And he's just going to sign off on it. But it's not like you have to have a huge multi-paragraph thing, but it is important to notate the date, the time, the duration, if anybody else was present during that conversation, and what topics you touched on specifically, and if there was anything to note on their reaction to it. I had one staff member in New York, she would start to scratch herself anytime she was given good or bad news. It was an emotional reaction to something. She would get new furniture in her room. You'd think that that would be amazing. She had a very big connection to the furniture that was there, and it was a very
Mm-hmm.
visceral reaction for her. It's good news that she took in a very extreme fashion, so I still documented that. You know what I mean? That was a very odd reaction to have, and we just want to make sure that we're protecting everything. So it doesn't need to be anything crazy. Don't make it like a publicly accessible thing. You don't want like a binder that somebody in your other staff is going to see. Mine is in a closed file that I can only get to. And like I said, it's one Excel spreadsheet with different tabs. It's very easy to add on a new tab for a new employee. It's very easy to print out a sheet and put it in a personnel file when you need to. And it's very easy to copy and paste it over to your attorney.
That's great advice.
It-
Thank you, Laura.
I have to echo that. I remember doing years ago management training for supervisors, and in those days we weren't using Excel spreadsheets. So I developed a form doing exactly what Laura just described. It's important to documenting is essential, but I agree 100% with what Laura just said. The way you document doesn't have to be elaborate. It just has to get the information down, and her system, I think, is fabulous. And
Awesome.
it's the first that I recall hearing it described that way. So I'm not saying it to flatter Laura. I just think it's really good.
Thank you. It sounds like a great system. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Last one in this section. When reviewing full-time staff, is it constructive to get feedback from them on part-time staff, or is that complicating the process? Now, it doesn't specify here if the full-timer is a supervisor who is supervising part-time staff or if they're a coworker, but that's the question.
One word of caution, if you're planning to do like these 360 reviews and get feedback from part-time staff on supervisors or whoever, don't make it anonymous. I actually frequently have this conversation with my own staff who would like to do anonymous 360 feedback, but in a previous library where I worked, we did an anonymous form at one time. And one of the first things that came in was something that would have and should have led to an investigation, but
Mm,
we didn't know who to follow up with. We didn't know who to contact. And it became this alarming thing because, you know, this thing was happening in the workplace, but we had no idea who to go to, who to contact, anything like that. So, I personally don't do 360 reviews, but if you do go down that path, just I err on the side of caution, and I would say do not do it anonymously.
thank you, Amy. Laura or Douglas?
All right. I would think that asking part-time staff to give feedback about full-time staff um, is while you could get some useful information, I also think it's very risky about creating dissent. And maybe if it's their supervisory, but the
Mhm.
issues about 360 that Amy mentioned, um, it, it I don't think you necessarily also want to empower the part-timers um, to think that they have some control over like the evaluation and ratings of full-time staff. Um, Either if you're getting input from everybody about everybody else, but that's really burdensome and not really working well. So I think it's better just to keep your eyes and ears open and have your supervisors keeping their eyes and ears open, listening and observing and making note about interactions that they observe. Because while the system that Laura described is important for discipline, it's also important for performance evaluations. So that
Mhm.
and I like very much that she said positive and negative, because if you're doing a performance evaluation once a year, you don't remember if you're doing it in January what happened last March. But if you have a
Right.
record like that, you can include all the positive things in the evaluation based on that record as well as a negative. So I'm not thrilled with the idea of consulting part-timers to evaluate how you evaluate full-timers.
I'm
Members
not
don't have an
either.
understanding of what has been assigned to the full timer, right? So they might
Right.
think that they're not,
Right.
um, that they're not shelving as they should be or something like that. But what they don't realize is that their supervisor or the director has assigned them this side project, which gives them more desk work, right? So there could be, that not having a full scope of what somebody's working on. I think it would be hard to get feedback from them. Sorry, Laura, I didn't mean to.
No, 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 that's fine.
Um,
It's the perception is so skewed because a lot of times you are working with department heads who you get a department head position or higher because you've been in a role for a certain duration of time. And with that time comes a certain level of experience. And what could take a new person 2 hours to do, somebody with the right experience, it can take them 10 minutes. And it is very much between institutional memory, previous work experience at that library, it expedites what it is that you're able to fit into an hour in a lot of circumstances, whether they already know the patron, they already know the situation, they know the other department head at the other library that there's a conflict with. Um, and it comes across as almost like lazy. Well, so and so just finished, this, and there's no way she did it in 15 minutes. Yeah, she's been doing this for 20 years. She did it in 15 minutes. She knew who to call, she knew what to write up, she knew how to handle it in the system, and it's done. And somebody who's new may take them a little bit longer. And so you're seeing them work on it longer. The end result is the same. You can't just go by what you're seeing. You're looking at the work product. We used to just do once a year annual reviews. And we did consider doing feedback, and we ended up deciding against it for a number of different reasons that have already been stated. Um, if you don't already have an HR committee on your library board, I would suggest doing one. It's only a few members, but it does give them, mine does not read annual reviews. It is strictly there if I'm looking to field, because they are a certain demographic of your board, a certain demographic of your population, and anything that we are suggesting as far as employment changes in the building are public, right? So people are going to know if I'm adding or deleting a role in my library. Number one, it's a sounding board for you that is enclosed, confidentiality, which is helpful. We also, as library directors, you are the only one with that position in your library. You know, you're not going to go and have certain conversations with your department heads. It's helpful to have a sounding board of somebody who is in your library situation, but has that confidentiality with you of knowing what's going on. It is also helpful to give them a heads up, you know, had to reach out to Douglas of so-and-so employee, again, confidential in this field. This are the steps that I am taking with this employee to correct the behavior, and I will report back and let you know how things are going, or if we're going to need to go in another direction. So that this way they are not surprised if I go to a board meeting and say so-and-so needs to be terminated. That I don't want to blindside anybody with that, you know, but it's also a public meeting. And if you're not going to, you know, rice noticing is also a thing that we have to make sure we take care of. So, you know, your HR committee is different. It's not the quorum of your library board. It is small group with just you, and you are making sure that they know that this is confidential. They are not to be talking about this with anybody else. But when I was doing this coursework, we were doing different case studies on different companies and how they do their annual reviews. And the one that I really liked a lot, I do have an open door policy in my library where staff can come in at any time and I pull them in at any time. But we were only doing the annual reviews once a year. And as Douglas said, it's really hard to reflect back, no matter how many notes you take, on everything that this person did or didn't do. And what I'm switching to is a quarterly touch base in addition to the annual review. And the quarterly touch base is simply me sending out a Google Doc that's a questionnaire every quarter at the end of the quarter. So I just sent them out for the first quarter, and it asks them to reflect on certain things. You know, did you hit all demographics in your programming spectrum for this quarter? What challenges did you feel you had with community outreach? Things like that. And it's not that we're looking to micromanage, but I want to start a conversation, and it's getting them to look back on what just happened in this quarter and reflect on it. How is the budget looking? Because costs are going up on things. Are you feeling comfortable with your current budget numbers for program supplies and things like that? And then when they come in to meet with me, we're fielding off of that questionnaire, and I have it documented and all the stats are there. And then I'm giving them feedback and they're giving me ideas. And it's a team building thing because we're doing it in a somewhat casual setting of these are the challenges we're having in our community. This is us spitballing it together and what can we fix with it? And then I can see how they've implemented that for Q2. And then at the end of the year, I have 4 different reports of what challenges they saw, how they addressed them, what things we broached together, you know, what things were just like, you know what, we've tried this 4 different ways. It is not flying. We're going to drop this and remove efforts to something else. Because a lot of what's going on in libraries right now, you know, we're trying to do the best that we can, and the public is, as the economy goes down, utilizing libraries more and more. So both the budget money, but also our employees' attention is going to be spread in different directions. So I just felt like this was a really interesting way to do it. So something for thought too, instead of just, you know, part-time or feedback, but more constructive one-to-one time with your department heads and reflecting, I thought was helpful.
Thank you, Laura. All right. Ready to move on. I just want to keep an eye on time. It's 10:47, so I was thinking we could get through maybe 3 more questions and then take a break. Does that sound good to all of our panelists? All right, great. Moving on to everyone's favorite subject, conflict. That's why we're here, right? So we're going to start with the first question. How do you handle conflict with or between staff members, as well as the aftermath of that conflict with the rest of the staff? So conflict between staff members, as well as like the ugh that comes out of it that flows into everybody else. Does anyone want to jump in on that one?
I mean, nobody likes conflict, and it is just naturally uncomfortable for all involved. You know, we're jumping in there in a situation we did not do, you know, and you are then asked to go and correct it. Um, you know, when you're doing, usually I do an interview with both of the parties that are involved separately. Because again, like Douglas said somewhat previously, like everybody has it's Rashomon, right? Everybody has that different viewpoint of the instance that just occurred. Whether it was body language interpretation, attitude interpretation, something that was misrepresented in a comment or action. And so I'm listening to each of them and seeing what is actually overlapping to find what is most common in the situation that just occurred. And then I'm meeting with both of them to go forward. And usually when I am navigating, that conversation is the most awkward because you're trying to be understanding of, because both parties at that point are injured and indignant as to why they're having this conversation. And you're trying to make everybody comfortable, but also open-minded to seeing the other one's point of view and perspective, and note that there's two sides to everything that occurred. Usually, I will say usually. Um, and then once you can usually neutralize that situation and navigate the outcome with them. Like I just had it happen a couple of weeks ago. And it was just a complete misunderstanding of what was going on and whose intentions were what. Um, and that's really all it came down to. Like you guys were just both totally you both had the same goal, but it was very different in how you were broaching it, and you felt like you were stepping on each other's toes. Best of intentions, very miscommunicated. Um, the rest of the staff, as far as like, I'm assuming we're talking about like creating more of a clique mentality, and there's teams and sides and all that type of stuff. It is really difficult to navigate that because they're just going, people talk. They're friends with certain members of staff and they're going to talk. And as long as I try to just remember that as long as I am handling it, the last thing that I say to them is that, we are handling this in a professional atmosphere. And I ask that you respond to each other in a professional manner, and a respectful manner as you go back out from my office and into the main floor, because you all have to work as a team once you're out there. We've had our point of discussion. Everybody has said what they needed to say. This is the resolution right now. And now we're going back out, and it's expected that everybody function as a team, and it's expected for professionalism and respect. Do you always get it? No, let's be real, people. It's like, no, but that's the message that I continue to send forth and try. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But that's why that documentation that you had the conversation is important.
Thank you, Laura. Amy or Douglas, would either of you like to add anything to that? We can move along too. We have plenty more conflict to talk about, so don't feel like you're not going to get your chance. Okay, moving along. Do you recommend hiring a harassment lawyer to come to the library and discuss what behavior is considered harassment? Oh, I feel like someone's got some harassment in their library. I'm sorry to hear that. And talk about what protected classes are. So once again, do you recommend hiring a harassment lawyer to come to the library and discuss what behavior is considered harassment and also talk about what the protected classes are? That's the question.
This is an awkward one because if I say yes, then I'm not trying to promote myself when I say this. It would be, it's not really a harassment attorney so much as it is just it's somebody who understands the law, because you want to teach not only about what is harassment and protected status. When I've done it, I teach it as sensitivity training, because what we're trying to do is educate the staff about the existence of different cultures and different backgrounds, different protected statuses. But that's just the very first step, and a lot of people kind of know that anyway. They understand that you can't discriminate on the basis of race or religion or national origin or sexual orientation or et cetera. It's much more teaching about sensitivity in a diverse work environment, and how to interact with people and to be conscious of people and to not just talk, to think before you speak, to take responsibility for your actions. And we extended both harassment and sensitivity based on interactions with other staff as well as interactions with the public, because in libraries, there's a lot of issue about harassment coming from patrons, excuse me, hopefully not trustees, although that happens as well. But certainly from patrons who are not necessarily sensitized and are not subject to any kind of training. I've had I can't speak to the ultimate. I mean, I come in and do the training and I leave, and so I can't really speak to the effect in the environment after it's over, and how much it made a difference if it did. But generally speaking, people are engaged, and I haven't heard that it created new problems and opened new issues. And in fact, usually it helps to sometimes inspire conversations about it. So whether it's you're hiring an attorney or somebody else who really knows what they're doing and how to do it, I think the training is a good idea. The other thing I'll add is that legally, employers are supposed to give harassment training to their staff annually or every other year. And so it's a good idea and more than just to do it because it makes sense, but also because to makes you legally compliant. God forbid you get hit with a lawsuit, you want to make sure that you have a record of having done the training and done what preventive things you could do to make sure it doesn't happen in your library.
Thank you, Douglas. Amy?
Yeah, I mean, I completely, of course, agree with Douglas. We do every other year here. Anything that gives us a stronger posture of compliance, like I'm all in. That said, this is one of those trainings that everybody's usually looking to do and every library director is looking to do. So, check with your municipality because they may be looking to schedule the same thing and then you can, potentially save cost and, jump on board the municipality's training. Check with your insurance provider. Sometimes they provide training at no cost or low cost. And I mean, you guys are in a consortium. So, I'm sure if you put out a message, hey, I'm looking to do this, probably multiple other libraries would be looking to do it as well. And then you could have some cost savings there. But I definitely agree. It's a good idea to have and have on a regular basis.
The one thing I would add to that, or maybe qualify with that, is if you do it with the municipality or the maybe the insurance carrier would, but the municipality, it's not customized to libraries, and there are. Well, I mean, I do training in different venues, but what I do for libraries is different because you have that whole patron element that you don't have. The municipality is not going to be sensitized to that. So, but the other things you said, that Amy said, make perfect sense.
Great, thank you. I'm going to jump down a little bit. We received two questions later on after the initial batch came out, and I feel like this one goes along sort of what we were just talking about, so I thought I would throw it in here. Would anyone care to discuss the legalities around neurodivergent employees? And I'm assuming potentially reasonable accommodations for them. I feel like that's where that question was sort of leaning. Since we were talking about protected classes and all that, I figured it tied in a little bit.
I could touch that to start at least. I looked when I saw that question, I actually looked up the definition of neurodivergent because I've heard that term, but I thought to talk about it, I should know what it means. And it's not actually a medical term, for at least that's the information I found, but it does refer to a category um, of conditions, things like autism spectrum, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, which has to do with the developmental coordination disorder, Tourette syndrome, various kinds of physical and emotional conditions that impact employees. They create challenges. Sometimes it relates to unique abilities in terms of memory, in terms of problem solving, in terms of spatial reasoning, but also creates other challenges. The key to me is that they're disabilities and you treat them the same as you would any other disability. Tara just referenced reasonable accommodation. It may be that the employees need to have some accommodation, which is some modification to their workplace that enables them to do it, to do the essential functions of their job. You have to be careful that you don't initiate about reasonable accommodation. That should come from the employee. Otherwise, then you're perceiving them as being disabled, and that creates a whole bunch of potential issues for you. But if the employee comes to you, or if you see an employee struggling, you just say, "Tell me, how can I help you? What do you need?" And then they ask about it. So you're not asking about reasonable accommodation, but you can certainly open the door if you have some idea that there are these issues. And then you have to adapt it based on the specific situation and the specific individual. I think an important piece of the whole thing is to play to their strengths, and to the extent you can, try to match whatever the impact of this neurodivergent condition is, to try to figure out what their strengths are and use those to put people into those positions. And so you don't put somebody who has ADHD, who maybe has difficulty with executive functioning and organizing things, as somebody who has to do a lot of organizing, but maybe they'll be better at doing the implementation of programming, which is in developing programming, which takes a lot more creativity, and that might be something that's more consistent. So it takes extra work, but it's a way to use that skill set that they have, much like anybody else who has any other skill set that you see, but to use that skill set in a way that takes the best advantage for them and for you of their condition, rather than looking at it as an obstacle. Look at it as an advantage. But again, the key is it's their disabilities, and whether it's that disability or if it's the disability based on a bad back or based on a sight impairment, you still have to treat them all through the process of interpersonal communication, which is, or they call it an interactive dialogue, which is just a conversation about what it is that their needs are. Make sure it's documented from a medical perspective, so that if you're accommodating an actually documented disability, and if it's not, just work with the skill set as best you can.
Thanks, Douglas. That was a great answer. Amy, would you like to chime in too?
Yeah, so just since we're talking about disabilities, just remember that, if somebody does request a disability, it needs to be an interactive process between the employee and the employer, right? It's not just they come to you, ask for something, and you say no, and it ends there, right? One tool that I find to be incredibly useful, there is a website called the Job Accommodation Network. I think the actual URL, I can put it in the chat. I think it's askjan.org. But
Yeah.
it allows you to look up, it has a whole database of disabilities. It gives you information about the disability, about common accommodations that can be asked for related to this disability. And it even goes so specific as to provide links to the things that you might need to or want to consider purchasing for the employee based on the accommodation that they've requested. So I think that's a really useful tool. And then the other thing is that I think the biggest pitfall with this is untrained supervisors, right? And I think Laura had mentioned earlier that people often become a supervisor because they've been with the library for a considerable amount of time, or they've really excelled at programming. And this is one thing that it's just so important to train your supervisors on, so that they know what to do if someone asks for an accommodation, or they know who to kick it to. They know what to do in terms of interacting with individuals who might have disabilities in the workplace, things of that nature.
Yeah, the Job Accommodation Network that Amy just referenced was created. It's a not-for-profit related to the government. It was created when the ADA was first enacted in 1992, I believe. And it's a very, very, I use it all the time as well. They, of course, think that almost anything you can imagine is a disability. I imagine if you put in cold, they're gonna tell you how it's a disability, but it does the things that Amy said about it. Overall, I think it's a very, very useful tool. I'm glad she mentioned that.
Thank you, and thank you, Amy, for sharing that link in the chat box. Laura, do you have anything to add? Or
No, I think they covered
no
everything.
pressure. I just want to make sure I didn't.
Yeah, no.
All right, so folks, it is 11:02. I think this is a good place to take this kind of break, coffee break, whatever. So why don't we all plan to be back here at 11:10? So we'll take an 8-minute break and we'll be back here at 11:10. All right. Thank you. We'll see y'all in a few minutes. Welcome back, folks. We got another minute or so. Hope everyone got what they needed out of that 8 minutes. All right. Pardon me. I have more warm beverage now to quell my allergy throat that we all have. John Trouse, I need to compliment your avatar when when your video is not on. You look very like a very serious poet, which I know you are. I love it. Fabulous. Okay, everyone. It is 11:10. I want to respect everybody's time
Thanks,
because we're
Tara.
down. You're welcome, John. Hi.
Hi.
I want to respect everyone's time because we're down to less than an hour now, and I would love to have a little bit of space at the end for Q&A. But we're just going to keep going. Panelists, you ready to continue?
Yes.
Excellent. I would expect nothing less from you three fabulous people. All right, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about professional development. So, our first question in that category is, what are some cost-effective ways that small libraries can support staff, professional development, and help maintain high morale? Whew, that's a heavy lift, but if you guys have any suggestions, let's hear it.
I do like Library 2.0, has a lot of good website, web generated content and different professional development options that can help toward continuing ed, especially with the change this year from the state as to how many hours with each of your employees are required. Um, Personally, I like to do it either on Employee Appreciation Day or on during National Library Week, because usually I try to do either a delayed opening or a closure. And I usually ask either my board or my friends group to get lunch for the staff, because I do find that a heavy morning conversation, especially if you're broaching issues that they know are about them, it does break the ice and have them come back together as a team. If you can do some kind of a team building casual event after the fact. So if you can do, the emotional intelligence webinar, or have Douglas come and talk, or not just Douglas, but anybody come and talk, and then have a break of some kind for them to reconnect with each other, whether it is one of my staff asked if we can book Bedazzle next time. So we might do book bedazzling as a group, but having conversation that is not super heavy, that is not targeted to an issue that they have, but allows them to team build and kind of connect socially before going back out, I do find helpful. And it does maintain that high morale and camaraderie, which is so important, while also addressing some of the professional development and soft skills that they may need to kind of perfect.
Thanks, Laura.
Sure.
Amy, did you want to add anything?
Sure. I mean, you don't necessarily need a big budget. I would say it's more about consistency. And don't be afraid to pull from the expertise within your own staff for continuing education, right? Like if we have someone go to a conference, when they come back at our next all staff meeting, they're going to do a knowledge share, right? So it can be simple things like that. I would also say don't be afraid to again, connect with your neighboring libraries. We frequently have continuing education for staff that we invite other libraries to come here, or we'll often we have paid municipal parking, which is a whole thing. So we'll often go somewhere else and join, another library staff for their continuing education. So, I think the importance is just consistently having things to offer, but and making sure that people are aware that, we all are on this path of lifelong learning, right? It's not just the patrons, it's us too. And I think, knowing that you support people bettering themselves and that you support this continuing education really does bring up morale. But there are ways to do it that is not going to be so hugely impactful to your budget, like we have somebody coming from Ohio, and we've worked it out so that they are doing like a tour of New Jersey libraries to bring the cost down for us as much as possible in order to get someone with that level of expertise to come here. So it might just be a little extra legwork on your own end, but you can do it cheap.
I would say look at your local businesses too, because I just actually had the director, we just had a senior living facility open in town. And the director there has a background in senior aging issues. So he actually offered to come and talk to my staff about just different behaviors that we may see and how to identify different challenges that they may have in the library, keywords and phrases that we can use to offer assistance and help and things like that. So sometimes even like your local businesses may end up with something that, is a free offer for them to come and chat with you as opposed to having a paid speaker come.
Those are great suggestions. Thank you all so much. All right, next question. Along the same lines, really, can you share an example of a library HR initiative, such as training, professional development, or staff engagement, that had a measurable impact on staff satisfaction or service quality? Another heavy lift. So, morale, service quality, those are all like great returns on investment. But if you can think of a specific HR initiative, training, professional development, or staff engagement.
I would say the biggest one is structured onboarding, right? Like a
Mm.
lot of people who come into libraries, um, you know, the supervisor will think like, oh, they've worked in a library, they can just hop
Mm,
right in, right? We have like a created pamphlet that is very structured. It has employee check-in moments, to say like, okay, how are you feeling? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Things like that. It has, now they check in with this person to learn this. Now they check in with that person. And that's huge, because I think right off the get-go, you're setting clear expectations, you're scheduling touch points, you're having that opportunity for any early course correction. But I really do think that it reduces turnover. People get to a level of competency much quicker. There's fewer performance issues later. So structured onboarding would be my number one. My number two is well-trained supervisors, right? As the director, we can't be everywhere at all times. We're not seeing everyone at all times. So, if you have, a monthly department heads meeting where you're talking with the supervisors, throw some training in there so that you guys are constantly discussing examples of what could happen and what your expectations are for how those will be addressed. So you really are a unified front across the whole library.
thank you. That's sorry, it's not y'all. It's all these male trees that they plant. I apologize. Thank you. That's great advice. I agree that I've seen a whole plethora of onboarding that's like real and not real, and formal onboarding is super helpful. It makes people feel really secure when they come to a new place too, and it seems like we all know what we're doing. So, and who to go to when they need help, which is another big one, because sometimes people are so afraid to ask for help, especially when they're new, because they don't want to ask a stupid question. So that's really great advice. Thank you. All right, another professional development question. How do you formalize succession planning and ensure that you have a pipeline of talent when key positions open up? And I think you guys touched on this a little bit about training and supervisors that are well trained, but if you want to just elaborate some more on that, succession planning.
It's a really delicate situation. Because you don't want the current person that you have to feel as though you are planning for their next person in order to push them out. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like you don't want to get into that kind of thing with it. My biggest thing has always been to create protocols more so than calling it succession planning. Like, what workflow are we going to design for this as a department head? What workflow are you designing? And how do we document that, what that workflow should look like? Do we want to do a manual for your department so that way people have a point of reference to look to for certain common questions or practices or something like that? And then you're kind of looking at what it is that they are doing, and it's giving them a little bit of a point of pride with it. Um, but the one thing that I do find a lot of times when trying to, like, I don't want to say like on the down low do succession planning, but like when you're looking at, your employees, some of them are very open, and it's like, well, my second career is going to be, so and so position. It's like, okay, I know you're not here for forever now. They've said it flat out. They may be even talking about their future plans or wherever. they're going next type of thing. And I do like them to feel comfortable with that. I don't take it as a threat, like that they're leaving imminently. But it does allow me to know like where their interests lie and what it is that they do in my library really well that I would like to have them train other people on and just kind of reinforce the security of that department. If I have somebody who is really awesome at community outreach, can you kind of create some guidelines and workflows for your other peers in the library on how you do this? Because we want to get this across the platform. We don't want it just to be that children's department has a great community outreach plan. Can you also talk to adult and teen services and maybe come up with something together and reinforce that whole branch of community outreach as opposed to having it just be that department that's super strong in it while everything is going well? And so that this way, when somebody does step down, I've already got a support network across the whole platform. So I kind of broach it in that way more than like role by role succession planning.
Thank you, Laura. Amy, did you want to add anything?
Um, I mean, I completely agree with Laura. I think she hit on all the important points. I mean, I would just say it's, you know, it's as simple as creating a culture where the staff become accustomed to no one person should be the sole source of information for this, right? So even if you aren't in the habit of creating a whole elaborate succession plan, just make sure it becomes part of your library's regular procedure that, okay, we have something new, like a native seed library, right? That tends to be a passion project of one individual. Well, let's make sure that somebody else is fully briefed on every part of that too, so that if that person leaves tomorrow, we're not left in the dark about anything. So even if you don't have the like formal guidelines or don't know where to start, I would start there with two people should know everything at the very least. Yeah.
Yes, we have to save the seeds. It's very important that we make sure all of our passion or whatever the passion library of things or a specific outreach initiative, like Laura was saying, it shouldn't be dependent on one person or one department. I just want to add like one opinion thing, at least that's to keep in mind too, is don't feel like when someone leaves, you have to like replace them with like a duplicate of that person. Because you may look at your staffing plan and say, do I really need a librarian doing what this librarian was doing or this associate was doing? Or do I need people power in another department or maybe doing different things? Like, don't feel like just because someone leaves that you have to slot in like an exact replacement of that person because libraries needs change over time. And you may have a position that's been there 30 years and that position has changed a lot with technology and how libraries are used. It doesn't mean you need to exactly replace that person with someone who's doing the exact same thing. So that's something to keep in mind too. Like always make sure you're looking at the big picture in your library of what your library really needs. Because we just can't hire like as many people as we want, because then that would be less of a problem. Um, we're all constrained within our budgets and staffing. So thank you guys. All right, so we're going to continue to move on. These are some general questions. And I think it looks like we're going to have time for some Q&A too, which is exciting, depending on how these next couple go. So a question for all of you. How should we approach the hiring and interviewing process given the increased use of AI by potential candidates? Excellent question. Anyone want to jump into that one?
I just had a couple of thoughts on it. One is to talk to people. If you're talking to the candidates, that takes away the AI because AI may make up things or whatever. But if you interview them and you see them on Zoom or better in person, and then you could ask the questions you need to ask, and then if there's stuff that is fabricated through AI, you could hear how they speak. If it's something involving writing, then you could, or say about program development, you could ask them to see a program or describe programs that they created. Things where you're taking it, not just what you're reading or seeing has been created, but what they're offering you in your face directly as a way to sort of work through all of it. The other thing is, as an attorney, the advice we generally give, I'm not giving this as legal advice again, but the advice we generally give about references is you only give her dates of employment and job title. However, as there's the practical side of things, and that is that we know that library world is a small community, and you all know each other, and you can ask people about other people, and you can get references, and many times by speaking to maybe not the current place they're working because you don't want to disclose that they're for them, you want to protect that they're looking for a job. But if people have worked more than one place, you could call the prior director at wherever they are and try to get some things. And you could probably get more information on the phone, just having a conversation, not something that's written, but an informal conversation, particularly if you know the person, and that's how you can also work through it. If they've never worked before or whatever, it's harder to do, but maybe you can get it through the school, if you know anybody wherever they went to school. But conversations, and getting unofficial references, I think can be very, very helpful to work through it.
Great. Yes, that's super helpful advice. And a lot of us know one another, so it never hurts to reach out to a friend if you have a question about a particular candidate. Laura or Amy, you guys, oh, Amy, yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So one thing that, this sort of ties into the question, that we've recently started doing that we have had huge success with, is giving the candidates, the majority of the questions in advance. And we have gotten some really, really phenomenal candidates since we've started doing this. And now you might say, but that makes it easy for them to do AI and all of that. But when we schedule the interview, we let them know, here are questions that we will be asking you, and it gives them a chance to prepare in advance. But then we also let them know that there will be X number of questions that will be asked on the fly to get a sense of, how they are in terms of answering questions on the fly. But a lot of our questions ask them to tie into either real scenarios or past work experiences. So AI tends to be very vague, right? Things like that. Like, I'm looking for specificity in your answer. How have you come across this in the past? If you haven't, how would you hypothetically respond to it? And in doing it in that way, I think you get a better sense of the whole person. And again, we've just been getting phenomenal feedback from staff that we've hired, especially those who may be in some way neurodivergent, or that having the opportunity to prepare has been really great. And we feel like we're getting a better sense of who the candidate truly is. So if, anyone is considering doing that, I'm a huge proponent of it.
I kind
That's a
of
great
love that. I
suggestion.
might steal
Yeah, it's a
that,
great
Amy, because
suggestion.
I always interview twice. I don't do it at just one interview. And for some, it is 2 separate days, depending on what the role is. But for something like circulation, my head of circulation will vet the first round of who she wants to interview for that role. And I just make my calendar available during the hours that she's conducting interviews. So this way, if she feels it's somebody that's a major contender for her, she will very casually say, "Oh, Laura's available. You want to chat? We'll interview. I'll do a secondary interview on the spot without labeling it as a secondary interview. It's just 2 perspectives of the same person, and I will have a same copy. We always do, a constructed list of questions ahead of time, so every candidate gets the same questions, so you can really compare the answers and see how their unique perspectives on things are. It also makes it a very level playing field for whoever is answering and interviewing at that time, but they may respond differently from one person to another. So she'll take some, I can take the other, and then we just go from one desk to another if they're a final candidate kind of thing. But at least I'm getting eyes on whoever the new hire is, and I've met them at least once before they come in for their first day. But it is just different perspectives. We had one person who did their first interview round was great, and their second interview round was, they just kind of felt very relaxed and were talking about how they didn't like books. And considering the job, that's a really, we're kind of
Interesting.
like, oh, okay.
And they don't like people either, right?
No,
Right.
and it's like those are the 2 key components, guy. So, And it's like, okay, so it did not come out in that first round at all. And they made it to the second, and then it was just a different person asking the questions, and they answered completely differently. So I definitely encourage two different people. You don't need to, I always like to have two people at an interview to begin with. But it's not always necessary to have a huge panel so that way the person feels very uncomfortable, from the get-go. But just consider having two different perspectives of interviews. But I like Amy's idea of maybe having some of them be known questions too. Very cool.
Thanks all. That was really helpful. Okay, so we're going from hiring to retiring now, switching gears a little bit. What are some ways I can, not me, I, person who asked question, may assist retiring staff in processing their retirement and benefits? I think it really depends on where you work, but I don't want to speak
It's
on anyone's behalf.
it also depends on if they've asked for assistance
Right.
versus if
Not
you're
like, I'm going to
presuming
help you
they want
process
help.
your retirement.
Yeah, there's definitely some legalities there as to how much you can help. The state does put out webinars every month, and you can get that schedule ahead of time so that this way they can see, because, it makes a difference if they're on tier one versus tier five. And, it's definitely, that's my first one. At their annual review is the only time that I push the question of, do you have any career goals that you want to work on together? My door is always open. They know that they can talk to me at any time about any um, opportunities that may arise, but that is in particular for any staff members who are considering retirement, or maybe I know they've already hit their 25 years and their age appropriateness for their level. Do you have any goals in the next year that you are wanting to work towards? What are your next career steps that you would like to take, or changes that you would like to make? And then if they say, and I have had people say, this is going to be the year that I retire, I'm just not sure on timeline. And then that kind of opens the door for me to say, okay, when you decide, here are things that I can help with. I can go over how much PTO time you still have banked with us, so that way you know how much time is still available to you. I can connect you with the person at town hall who handles pensions and benefits, so this way you can have that conversation with them about your particular package. Here's the email for the auto send, so that you can get the list of all of the different state PERS related trainings that are going to be happening. And they happen multiple times every month, so that this way they know. And I always just follow up with, and feel free to come to me with any questions that you may have. I will help you get the best resource. Not that I will do it for you, because it is their retirement, and God forbid I misguide them in the wrong way. You don't want to do that. They will also have one-to-ones with a PERS. I forget what their title is, but it's essentially a person who specializes in retirements on PERS. And this way they can go over their particular PERS tier with them, and how to file everything and what that looks like. So I always recommend that one very heavily, so that way they have all of their documentation ready to go.
Great advice, Laura. Thank you. Amy, anything to add?
I think Laura touched on all the important points. The webinars that she mentioned, I actually take those myself, just so I have an understanding of what they're hearing. And that way too, I do generally, people will tell you that they're retiring like 6 months in advance, because
Hmm.
with the pension system, it takes that long. But and often I've found the biggest need that they have is to be a sounding board for frustration against what they're going through with the Division of Pension and Benefits. But having, I would learn as much as you can about the process and how the process functions in your municipality. Ask if you can sit in on a meeting between the municipality and the person retiring, so you know what information that they're getting during that meeting. And that will just better prepare you for the next person and the next person who are eventually retiring. So I would say know your own processes and have an understanding yourself of what retirement looks like. And I mean, that's just good practice for yourself when you get there as well, right? Because then you're not going through it the first time either.
Thank you. That's good advice. All right. We're getting to the end, folks. Thank you all for hanging on with us. Um, this one's kind of seems a little less heavy. What's the most efficient way of keeping staff on the same page? Staff meetings, one-on-one meetings, memos, emails? What do y'all prefer to keep all your staff properly communicated with?
Okay, so here I'm going to make a plug because you guys are all Buckles directors. And so at NYPL, we also had Gmail. And this is not a service that is currently on our Buckles Gmail, but there is something called a red receipt. And when you send out a full staff email with an update on a policy, a procedure, whatever it is, you can actually see exactly which staff member has read that email. And so this way, you know, whatever email, memo, whatever it is that you've put out there, it's documented that they've read it. It's similar to like, remember in the old days, the director used to like write up the memo and you got the time cards and you'd have to
Mhm.
initial that you read that memo, you know, and I am sure some people still do it, but I loved it because I can just file that in a Gmail folder. And it's not something that's on our current Gmail as an option. And I remember asking Eric about it years ago. And I'm kind of wanting to revisit it because, again, as staff changeover happens, as your staff grows, it's really, really nice function because everybody's on different shifts. And especially you as the director may not have day-to-day contact with all of your staff members. Being able to send that out and also see like how quickly they read it, you know, and just make sure, you know, everybody's following up in a timely manner to watch their staff emailing and things like that. So I love email receipts. I do email out a lot to staff, usually, especially just to reiterate everything. I do a quarterly staff meeting before the library opens, just to give everybody an update. And I give my children's and any programming teams essentially the opportunity to share so that way my CERC team knows what kind of questions may be coming in the next couple of weeks, especially around like summer reading kickoff and things like that. So they do get a staff meeting quarterly, and then the email memos out pretty regularly.
Great. Thanks, Laura.
Sure.
Amy, did you want to?
I think this is somewhat a hard question because it very much depends on your size and your shifts and how many part-timers you have and how many full-timers you have. You know, I know there are libraries out there that do like a 5-minute team meeting before they open the doors for the day, right? Or you know, the all staff meeting. I think the most important thing is that you're having communication and the channels that you use for communication are well known to the entire staff, right? So, like, depending on the urgency, does that mean that, like, you as director or supervisor are going to send an email to everyone in the building or your department? If not there, then where, right? Is it, do you use Sling? And I would just err on the side of caution of having too many communication channels, right? Like people generally, you know, there are staff members who struggle to get to check their email once a work shift, right? So just make sure that there is communication and that the channels of communication are well known to everybody in staff so that they can find that information.
Mhm. Thank you, Amy. That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for sharing that. All right. So, believe it or not, we are down to our last pre-submitted question. And I actually think, Amy, you talked about this a little bit, and Laura, about how you became more knowledgeable in HR personally. But this question is more in general about libraries that have had staff trained in HR. So this person asked, curious to hear other libraries who have hired or had existing staff member trained for HR certification and what that entails. There are lots of different trainings for HR, but maybe if you could speak to the ones that you guys are familiar with, that would be helpful.
Sure. So I, you know, I guess my first thought is if you're interested in getting into the realm of HR, don't be afraid to ask, right? I was a youth services supervisor when an HR position opened up, and I, you know, had that whole like, am I even qualified for this? And ultimately went down that path, and I'm so glad that I did. I started by doing a really good base layer through the County College of Morris, which I think Laura's the course that you mentioned. So they have like an HR generalist certificate course that you can get, which provides a really good base layer. You know, a lot of your classmates will be from, you know, like private organizations or kind of all walks of life. Um, After that, I wanted to get like an even more formalized certification. Um, but it's expensive and it is time consuming, right? So I actually, to kind of get around the expense of it, I joined the Morris County chapter of the Society of Human Resource Management. There are multiple chapters throughout the state of New Jersey. The reason I joined them was that they actually offer a scholarship for people who are newly, in HR, or even people who have been working for some time but aren't certified, to go to a local college or university and take a SHRM test prep course. And they also cover the cost of the SHRM online learning system. So I got, and one thing that they told me was nobody ever applies for this scholarship. So we were so excited to have someone, right? And you do have to give back volunteer time if you get the scholarship and like that. But if you're like worried about the cost, I, encourage you to look out to these other local chapters because they might have a way to help you out. Exam eligibility is, or it was, I don't know if it's changed in the years since I did it, but it's based on your level of education and how many years of HR experience that you have, depending on what that is. So like if you have a bachelor's and say like 2 years, you can take an exam. If you have, oh, I see. How much are we talking about without a scholarship? So the exam itself is like $500, $400, $500. The SHRM online learning system is about $1,200. The course itself, I took the course through Fairleigh Dickinson, and I want to say that was probably like $800-ish. So it's not cheap by any means. And basically, so once you have, and I will say it was probably, looking back, like a year of study for me. And they say, I remember when I was in my course at Fairleigh Dickinson, it was very sort of like military-esque because the professor said, look to your left, look to your right. One of you is not going to pass the SHRM exam, right? I know, really like terrible way to get everyone hopeful here. But I think it's all that to say, it's not something where you're like, oh, I got this. You have to study. I think only 60% of people pass it on their first try, something like that. And you have to study, and there's a specific way the questions are asked in which they're looking for the answer. Totally worth it. I will say, I think getting HR certified fully changed my library career, right? I think one of the reasons I was selected as a director tied directly to the fact that I had this HR certification and understanding and experience. So I would highly recommend, if you're interested in it, do it if you can. But it's a process. It's not easy. You got to study. You got to take it seriously. But the knowledge and the payout, I think, is totally worth it.
Thank you for that very detailed and specific answer, Amy. We really appreciate it. Yeah, that was great. Folks, we have come to the end of our pre-submitted questions. Congratulations. Thank you all for hanging in with us this whole time. And now we are happy to open up the chat box to see if anyone has additional questions. You are welcome to ask the whole group, or if you'd like to ask a question anonymously, you can direct or private message, whatever the kids say. Catherine Ennis here, my fabulous co-chair. While we're waiting for those questions to come in, I'd like to give our panelists just a moment or two to give whatever general advice or like words of wisdom they have about HR. So Douglas, I'm going to put you on the spot since you haven't had a chance to answer the last couple questions since they were so library staffy. So Douglas, would you mind just sharing your final thoughts or words of wisdom in regards to HR? Thank you in advance.
Sure. The key things for HR are documentation and communication and consistency. Those are the three. You need to have things in writing. And earlier, Laura described a whole system using an Excel spreadsheet and different pages for each employee, where you're jotting down things that are positive and negative or areas for improvement versus basically any kind of significant interaction that occurred that wouldn't necessarily be documented someplace else. any documentation is the most important thing. Over the years, I've had an HR manager or a director call me, maybe the supervisor there, and they say they want to terminate somebody, and I say, well, what kind of documentation do you have? Well, I spoke to him a number of times. Well, okay, that's very nice, but what record do you have? You need it in writing. So documentation is very, very key. Communication is also essential on a lot of other both related to discipline aspects, but certainly related to all other aspects of HR and management, because you have to communicate to so people in the organization know what's going on. And communication is, of course, a two-way street. It's listening as well as speaking, and hearing what people are saying. It's the way to uncover a lot of things that are going on before they become issues, before they become problems. It's also a way to recognize certain talents that you might not have realized on the surface, but just by listening carefully and then communicating to make sure that people have a consistent message and consistency, meaning to not treat everybody exactly the same, but basically the same, and not to avoid favoritism, but also consistency helps people to know what to expect, and it gives them a sense of comfort. And if they think you're consistent and you think that you're being fair, they're going to be happier in their job. You don't want to give them opportunities to say, "Oh, she's being, she plays favorites," or he, that's his buddy, so he's doing something for them. You want it to be that everybody gets treated on an objective, fair basis. That helps to make happier employees. It helps to keep you non-union unless you're already unionized, but it helps to keep you non-union. And it helps to have people have greater satisfaction, which goes to a lot of the questions that we talked about in terms of morale, in terms of avoiding poison and keeping staff well informed, and keeping staff engaged and avoiding turnover. So the
That was
documentation, communication, and consistency.
excellent. Thank you, Douglas. That was super helpful. Yes, applause, snaps, claps, whatever. I'll have Laura go next. Laura, if you wanted to share any final words of
Sure.
wisdom with folks. Thank you.
I think anytime you're dealing with people, it is a very fluid situation, and no two circumstances are exactly the same. It may be the same issues that are popping up, but no two people are the same, so it's always going to be broached or understood in a different way. Um, and it is really easy, as the library director that's also HR talent management, to kind of feel like, somebody's coming to you and complaining all the time, whether it's about a job task or another staff member, to kind of if ever anybody saw that TED talk about like the blowfish syndrome, where it's like, you just get triggered and you're like, you don't hear what's happening. And a lot of times you're HR, but you're also the library director, and kind of trying to take that step back and just look at what it is that they're saying and get to the root of what the problem is, without taking it too close to heart or as a personal judgment on what it is that you are doing in your own capacity, because you are not in the children's room when these things are happening, or in the senior room when things are happening. And you are hearing a lot about different thing. You're meeting with the borough administrator and the police chief, and something occurred in the library, and you have to kind of play detective to get down to the nitty gritty about what that interaction was about, and how your staff handled it with each other, how they handled it with the public. You can't be at all places at all times to be a set of eyes and ears, so it's very easy to feel overwhelmed, and just to kind of make sure that you again take that breath and make sure you're dealing with people. When you're doing your documentation, especially, it needs to be professional. It needs to be reflective of what the situation was and what that conversation, what keywords were said, and not a personal interpretation of, well, she sat there with defiance. That's not going to help Douglas and Cole. Okay, so it's making sure that you're kind of going through in a professional manner, both how you're talking with the employee. It should not be a heated discussion at any point in time. Try to make sure that it is maintained in a professional atmosphere, in a professional level, one of mutual respect if you can, and just make sure that you're kind of going through this process as almost like a removed element. It is I feel so bad using this as the analogy, but it's like a divorce mediation. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's two people who are not getting along here, and you
Mm-hmm.
have to kind of go through that. So Douglas covered all of like the more clerical things. I'm covering more of the emotional on there.
Thank you so much, Laura. Amy, not to put you on the spot one last time, but if you have any final words of wisdom for our attendees today, we would love for you to share that at this time.
Um, one thing that always floors me about HR in libraries is that it's so uniquely different every library you go to, right? So I teach the HR basics for super library supervisors, and I always ask people who handles HR at your library, right? And it's like, oh, well, Joan, who's head of circulation, but also head of IT, but also head of HR, right? And people, HR, I think is confusing to them because of the fluidity that Laura mentioned, but also because the structure is so very different in any library that you go to. But I will say that one part of it that I think libraries are fabulous at handling is adding empathy into HR, right? Like HR gets a really bad rap in the media, right? Like you don't want to be Toby from The Office who's like totally ineffective. You don't want to be like the HR department from Severance, which is like super intense and looming, right? And so I think libraries are fantastic about bringing that empathy and understanding into HR, but we just need to make sure we follow it up with the accountability and the documentation and the consistency and all of that. Because at the end of the day, you really are providing a level of internal customer service to your staff, right? And you want to make sure that you're holding up to your customer service standards that you so excellently provide to your patrons, right? So that would be my last thought.
That's an excellent point that we always need to remember. Customer service isn't just external, it's internal, and that should apply to everything in the library, including HR. So thank you for that very important reminder, Amy. We did receive a chat box question. Do you mind if I read it, Catherine? Or you?
We can read it. We also do have a couple of anonymous questions as well.
Oh, that's exciting. All right, so I'll read this non-anonymous one, and then Catherine will handle the anonymous ones. And in case anyone needs to log off immediately, I just want to say a couple quick things. I want to thank our colleagues from Stella and LUCC or Luck. I don't know, do y'all call it Luck? In Buckles, we like an acronym, we like to make it a new word, so I'm not sure, but we wanted to thank our colleagues from Stella and LUCC for joining us today. There will be an anonymous evaluation at the end sent to everyone who participated or attended today. So please, even if you're from outside of Buckles, if you're one of the colleagues joining us from afar, please consider filling out that evaluation. It really helps us craft programming that's helpful to library staff. And of course, I want to thank our fabulous panelists, Doug, Amy, and Laura. You guys did an awesome job today. Thank you so much. Thank you to my co-chair, Catherine, Darlene from the Buckles office, and all the members of the LAMP committee. I just want to get all that out of the way in case our questions run over a little bit and people need to jump off. So we'll start with this non-anonymous question. Is there a proper way to give someone a negative reference? I'll let anyone who'd like to answer that answer it. Thank you.
So I don't give references. I will confirm that someone has worked here and I will confirm the time they has worked here, which is really, I guess, the pot calling the kettle black because I do call for references. But the reason being is, to be quite honest, I am afraid of a defamation lawsuit. If I am to say something that would then, somehow get back to that person and they found out that they didn't get the job, what are the chances of that happening? I've never heard of it happening. That doesn't mean it's not happening, but that's why I will not give a negative reference. I will just confirm the person was employed here and for the period of time they've been employed.
Thank you, Amy. That's great perspective. Laura, do you have anything you want to add?
To be honest, like Douglas said, I've kind of been trained to only give the dates of employment for a lot of different reasons, but I will say that tone can help a lot if you do get one of those phone calls. So somebody who is like, "Oh my God, Tara, yes, she was definitely employed here from such and such dates," sounds really different than, "Yes, Tara Cooper was employed here from such and such dates." You know what I mean? Like, but on the transcript, it is going to be reading the same, So to me, it's tone. is so helpful when somebody is giving me a very dry answer. So I would say that that would be my recommendation. Because again, same thing. I'm sure Douglas has something to chime in here because Amy and I are both worried about the lawsuit aspect of it.
No, I actually, Laura, what you said is exactly what I was going to say, that it's better not to say something outright, but there are ways that you can say things without saying something. And if you're going to give somebody a positive reference, it's one thing, but when you're not saying anything, and not just saying, I'm sorry, our policy is only to confirm dates of employment and job title, but say, I'm not really in a position to say anything much about this person's work. A lot of it has to be not really nonverbal because it's on the phone, but tone, the tone of voice, how you say it, and maybe your choice of words without actually saying it outright, is the way to do it, because you want to avoid giving something really positive for somebody who was not. And sometimes saying nothing is really just as effective.
Thank you. Right. It can be implied, right? I called someone for a reference once and they asked me if I could take a Zoom call, and during the Zoom call they just slowly shook their head no the whole time. But their words were like,
There you go.
yes, they worked here from this day to this day. And I was like, okay, thank you so much for taking the time to Zoom with me. So anyway, thank you all for answering that question. I am so excited to hear these anonymous questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Catherine for that. Thank you, Catherine.
Sure. So the first question, the person says, I'm from a union civil service library. The bulk of my staff have not opted to join our union. Our shop steward is not very organized, and there is one vacant shop steward position. So my question is, as administration, how much of a responsibility do I have to ensure that union matters are properly communicated, executed to staff?
It's not your job. You have to communicate to staff what you have to communicate for yourself as to your whole staff. But if it's a union matter, it's not your job to communicate. The only time you really care about it is if you're in negotiations and either the union team at negotiations is not being responsive or cooperative, or is making ridiculous proposals or something, or that they've concluded negotiations and you want to make sure that what was negotiated is ratified. But on a day-to-day basis, it's not your job. And if the union is not being effective, that's the problem between the employees and the union that's representing them. You should not get involved in that.
Thank you. All right. Next anonymous question. Let's hear it.
So second question is, what happens when your supervisor is documenting concerning behavior about their direct report, but you have reservations about the supervisor's ability to manage, that what they're interpreting as problematic behavior is actually normal behavior? How do you look into this without undermining your supervisor, who may in fact be right about what they're seeing?
I'm glad I'm not a
Have
panelist.
you been
just saying.
documenting the supervisor? That's what I'm like. This seems like a multi-tier thing here. I'm like, okay, have they been documenting the supervisor because they have concerns about the supervisor? And then it's like, okay, if you've reviewed the documentation, has there been any instances where you have become involved or another supervisor has become involved? Is there any overlap where you may have a different vantage point? It depends on what it is that's being documented to. Is it something that you would be able to, pull? Is it something that, okay, they don't know how to input a library card registration after being here for 3 years? Can you pull one of the ones that they did to see where the technology glitch is? There's so much to unpack here. I'm like, I feel like this is a big one. Because you do want to respect that chain of command, but at the same time, so if they are complaining to you to me that they are concerned about this employee, that automatically opens the door for you to meet with that employee. They are telling you that they believe that there is a problem. So now you have an open door to kind of investigate it further, which is also going to have you kind of looking at the supervisor as well, because there is a certain amount of workflow that they are supposed to be overseeing. So it's like, what are the complaints versus how did the supervisor handle the complaint or the issue that popped up? And see what, okay, so this was the documentation, XYZ happened. What was the follow-up? What was the next step that was supposed to be taken? Because anytime that you are documenting someone, it is also to a certain degree as to what you are doing to correct the problem, right? So you observed them having a difficult time with the computer inputting library cards. We decided that we were going to provide additional training hours on Mondays for them to do nothing but library cards with a senior staff member, so that way they could fix that gap in their education. If after that they still don't know how to do it, then you have a next step to go to. But you're supposed to always give somebody the opportunity to correct a negative that you are seeing. It's not just that you're documenting that there is a problem, you're also documenting what you did to try to help them correct the problem. So, I would say start from that point. This supervisor documented what was also the follow-up for each of these issues and where do those kind of land. And then that also kind of puts the supervisor under a little bit of observation so that you can see, because it seems like you have two concerns. You have the supervisor's concern as a concern and the actual subordinate as a concern. So I would look at both and what that whole process has been looking like for both of them.
Thank you,
Just to
Laura.
just to
Mhm.
add to that, I think I would, my first step would probably be, it sounds like in this example, you've read the supervisor's documentation, but I would meet with the supervisor. Only so much is probably being put in, in written word. And I would talk with them and have them go over with each documented example with me in that meeting, just to get a better understanding of exactly what happened. What did you do? In order to correct the action or help the person improve, and see if I could parse out during that meeting some points where, I start leaning one way or the other. But I completely agree with everything that Laura said as well.
Thank you, Amy and Laura. And I think do we have just one question left?
Oh, that was it. That was the last one.
Oh, that was the last one. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. And it is 12:01. So we did it. Thank you so much again to our wonderful panelists. I think Catherine has a couple of event announcements and then we'll say bye to everybody.
Yeah, so yes, thank you to our panelists. We just wanted to let everybody here know about a few upcoming LAMP things that we have. So the next thing is, if any directors are out there this afternoon, they can join me for Community Circle before our executive board meeting tomorrow. At the beginning of May, May 7th at 2 p.m., we are going to do What is Your Career Path? That's virtual for anybody who's interested in joining, or any of your staff members who might be interested in joining. At the beginning of June, we don't have a set date or time yet, but we're going to do a skill building for new directors and any directors who might want a refresher on reporting and working with municipalities. And just to let everybody know that the next time we do our supervisory training program is going to be in spring of 2027. But we look forward to seeing people at our upcoming events. We hope that you got some really good information. I know I did, from our panelists. So thank you again to Laura, Douglas, and Amy for joining us today. And if you ever have any questions for us, always feel free to contact Tara and myself and the rest of the LAM committee, and we can hopefully answer whatever you have. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you again to our panelists, and thank you everyone for attending. And I hope you have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Take care.